It had been a quiet Thursday morning, the kind where the city feels almost asleep despite the bustle of early commuters. Michael Carter, a young man in his late 20s, had just locked the apartment door of his tiny studio and was heading to the nearby coffee shop to grab a quick espresso before his big interview at a marketing firm downtown. The sun was just beginning to pierce the haze of winter fog, casting a golden shimmer over the sidewalks. Michael was nervous. This was the kind of opportunity he had worked tirelessly for over the past few years, grinding through freelance gigs, late-night campaigns, and endless networking events. His resume was polished, his portfolio impeccable, and his suit freshly pressed, yet he could feel the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. As he approached the crosswalk, the sharp smell of smoke reached him first. He paused mid-step, scanning the street instinctively. At first, he thought it might be the usual exhaust from the early delivery trucks, but the smoke was thicker, acrid, curling into the morning air in a dark, menacing column. Then he saw it. The apartment above the corner bakery was on fire. Flames licked the edges of the second-floor windows, and black smoke poured into the sky. A crowd had gathered, a mix of shock and fear on their faces, but no one had dared to approach the building. Michael's heart raced. He had always been the kind of person who acted before thinking, the type who couldn't ignore someone in danger. He dashed across the street without hesitation, shouting for anyone inside to get out. At first, there was no response, just the crackling of flames and the terrified faces of neighbors shouting for help. Then, through the thick smoke, he saw her, a woman leaning against the doorway of her apartment, coughing, panicked, and frozen in fear. Her hair was singed at the tips, her clothes marked with ash, and her eyes wide with terror. "Come on, I've got you," Michael yelled, sprinting up the narrow staircase of the old building. He could feel the heat intensifying with each step. The wooden railing beneath his hands was scorching, and the walls were blackened with soot. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, sharpening his focus. He reached her in seconds that felt like hours. "Grab my hand, I won't let you fall." She hesitated, fear anchoring her feet to the spot. He saw the hesitation in her eyes, the silent calculation of whether she could trust a stranger. Without thinking, he gently but firmly grasped her wrist, anchoring her trembling body to his own. "I promise, we'll get out," he said, his voice loud but steady, cutting through the roar of the fire. Together, they moved down the stairs. Smoke filled their lungs, making each breath a struggle, and sparks fell around them like tiny meteors from the ceiling. Every instinct told Michael to move faster, yet he made sure she could keep up, guiding her through the chaos. At the bottom, the doorway to safety seemed like a distant dream, the fire threatening to cut off their path at any moment. Just as they reached the first floor, a sudden collapse of the ceiling sent a shower of embers around them. Michael instinctively pushed her behind him, shielding her body with his own. Pain seared across his arms, but he didn't dare stop. With one final sprint, he burst through the doorway into the cold morning air, dragging her out just as the firemen arrived with hoses and axes. They fell to the sidewalk, coughing and gasping, their clothes smoldering slightly, but both alive. The crowd erupted in applause, some cheering, some filming with phones, but Michael barely noticed. He looked down at her, relief and worry mixing in equal measure. She looked at him, eyes wide, as though she had only just realized the magnitude of what had happened. I can't believe you did that," she managed, her voice trembling. I thought I was done for." Michael gave a weak laugh, brushing soot from his suit. "Anyone would have done the same," he said, though the truth was he knew few people would have. His chest was still pounding, adrenaline leaving his body in ragged waves, leaving him feeling both exhausted and strangely alive. Paramedics approached to check them over, but Michael waved them off for himself, insisting she get priority. They spoke briefly, and she accepted his refusal with a nod, still clutching his arm as if letting go would shatter the fragile thread that had kept her alive. They didn't exchange names yet, only words of gratitude, and yet in that instant, an unspoken connection had formed, forged in fear and courage. Michael lingered for a moment, watching her disappear into the ambulance with a paramedic guiding her. He felt a strange emptiness in his chest, an ache that wasn't just physical but emotional. Saving a life, he realized, was not just about courage, it was about responsibility, about the knowledge that someone had entrusted you with their very existence. And now that it was over, he had to return to his own life, his own small battles, as though nothing had happened. Shaking himself, he ran the last few blocks to the marketing firm, soot-streaked and disheveled. He knew he looked like a mess, a man who had just survived something catastrophic, but he tried to smooth his hair and straighten his tie as best as he could. The lobby was quiet, the receptionist offering a polite smile, oblivious to the morning's chaos outside. Michael took a deep breath, trying to shove the memory of smoke and heat to the back of his mind. When he was called in, he walked into the interview room, expecting the usual formalities, the polished handshake, the perfunctory small talk, the questions about strengths, weaknesses, and experience. He answered carefully, highlighting his skills, his projects, his commitment to teamwork, all the while fighting the image of the terrified woman he had pulled from the fire. And then, just as the interview was reaching its midpoint, the door opened, and the impossible happened. The woman from the fire walked in. She looked calm now, composed, her hair brushed, her eyes bright with a curious intensity. She glanced around the room before her gaze landed on him. Michael froze, disbelief striking him like lightning. This was the same woman he had saved only hours earlier, the one whose life had been in his hands. And now, inexplicably, she was standing there as part of the interview panel. Her lips curved into a small, enigmatic smile, and she extended her hand toward him. "Michael Carter, I presume," she said, her voice calm but commanding. The familiarity of her presence was jarring, a surreal twist that made the hours of adrenaline and fear feel distant yet intensely vivid at the same time. Michael swallowed hard, words failing him for a moment. Yes, that's me," he finally managed, shaking her hand, feeling the firmness of it, the confidence that radiated from her even in casual contact. He realized then that his morning, already extraordinary, had become something almost cinematic, his heroic act outside in the burning building directly intersecting with this moment, this opportunity, this chance encounter that could change the trajectory of his life. She gave him a measured nod, and he could sense a flicker of recognition, though she did not verbalize it. The interview resumed, but now the atmosphere was electric. Michael's nerves had shifted from anxiety to alertness, each word he spoke carrying the weight of unspoken history. Every answer he gave, every example he shared, felt amplified, as though she could see into the courage and character that had driven him to risk everything that morning. And so, the morning that began with fear, smoke, and chaos had now transformed into an unexpected collision of fate, opportunity, and destiny. Michael had no idea how this encounter would unfold, but he knew, deep in his bones, that life had a way of testing people in fire and then rewarding them in the most extraordinary ways. Michael barely breathed as the woman stepped fully into the room. She carried herself with a calm confidence, her posture perfect, her eyes locking with his for just a fraction of a second that felt like an eternity. Recognition flickered in both their eyes, unspoken and electric, a spark that neither could ignore. She smiled faintly, and it was a smile that seemed to carry gratitude, curiosity, and a subtle challenge all at once. "Michael Carter," she said, her voice calm but commanding. He swallowed hard. Yes, that's me," he managed, his throat dry, words crawling out slowly as though weighed by the morning's adrenaline. He shook her hand, feeling the warmth and firmness, the same hand that had been trembling just hours before when he had pulled her from the flames. For a moment, the room seemed to shrink, the walls dissolving around them, leaving only the memory of smoke, heat, fear, and courage. The panel watched silently, confused at the sudden tension that seemed to hang between the two. One of the interviewers cleared his throat, shifting papers nervously, but Michael's attention was entirely on her. She was composed, professional, yet he could see the subtle traces of the morning etched in her eyes, the same fear and relief he had witnessed firsthand. "Please, have a seat, Michael," she said finally, gesturing toward the chair. The room felt charged now, every word and movement heavy with meaning. Michael sat down, trying to collect himself, to focus on the interview, but the memories kept flooding back. The smoke, the heat, the moment when he had lunged forward and shielded her from falling debris. The way her eyes had locked with his, trusting him in a moment when she had no choice but to do so. The interview began again, but now it had a different tone. Her questions were precise, incisive, and thoughtful. She asked him about his experiences, his approach to problem solving, his ability to remain calm under pressure. Each question seemed to test not only his professional skills but also the qualities he had displayed earlier: courage, empathy, quick thinking. Michael realized, as he answered, that she wasn't just evaluating him as a candidate. She was seeing the real him, the person he had been all morning: decisive, brave, compassionate. "Tell me about a time you had to make a critical decision under pressure," she asked. Her eyes bore into his, and Michael felt the weight of expectation, the kind that could intimidate or inspire. He took a deep breath, his mind flashing back to the fire, the moment he had acted instinctively. "There was an incident just this morning," he began, carefully choosing his words. "A fire broke out in an apartment building I was passing. A woman was trapped on the second floor. I didn't think. I just ran to help. I grabbed her, shielded her from falling debris, and got her out safely before the firefighters arrived." The room went silent. He could feel every panelist's gaze, some incredulous, some impressed. But it was her reaction that mattered most. She leaned slightly forward, her expression unreadable for a heartbeat, then softened. "That's remarkable," she said. "Most people hesitate. You acted without thinking of your own safety." Michael shrugged, self-conscious. "I didn't feel like I had a choice. Anyone would have done the same, I guess." But he could see she didn't quite believe him. Her gaze lingered on him, and he realized she understood courage, instinct, and the human capacity to act decisively in a life-or-death moment. The interview continued, but now it was less about scripted answers and more about character, about who Michael was beyond the resume, beyond the polished portfolio. She asked him about teamwork, about leadership, about moments when he had been tested. Each question allowed him to reveal more of himself, and in return, she revealed just enough about her own values and expectations to create a subtle connection. At one point, she paused, her eyes meeting his across the table. "You saved my life today," she said, softly, almost as if speaking aloud for herself as much as for him. "I can't explain why you were there, why you acted, but I remember it. And I wanted you to know, that matters. That matters more than any resume could." Michael felt a warmth rise in his chest, a mixture of pride, relief, and an unexpected vulnerability. No one had ever acknowledged him in this way, not for what he had done as a person, not for the instincts that defined him in moments of crisis. And yet, here she was, recognizing him fully, bridging the gap between heroism and ordinary life, turning a fleeting act of courage into a meaningful connection. By the time the formal questions ended, the room had changed. The tension of a typical interview had shifted into something more profound, almost electric. The other panelists began to ask standard follow-ups, but Michael's mind kept returning to her, to the improbable coincidence, to the strange way life had intertwined their paths. He realized that fate had a sense of timing, that sometimes acts of courage are rewarded in ways that go far beyond expectation. When the interview concluded, she stood and extended her hand again. "Thank you for sharing that with us, Michael. Your courage, honesty, and character are exactly what we look for in our team. I think you'll find that the work here will challenge you, and reward you, in ways you can't yet imagine." Michael shook her hand, his pulse still racing, a mixture of excitement and disbelief coursing through him. "Thank you, and I'm just glad you're safe," he managed, his voice catching slightly. She smiled again, a small, genuine curve of her lips that lit up the room. As he left the building, the afternoon sun catching the edges of the glass doors, he felt the weight of the morning lift, replaced by something lighter, brighter, and entirely unexpected. The fire, the fear, the adrenaline, it had all led him here, to a moment where heroism and destiny converged in the most unexpected way. Later that evening, as he replayed the events in his mind, Michael realized that life had a strange way of testing people. Sometimes, it threw chaos, fear, and danger at you to see how you would react. And sometimes, just when you thought the moment was over, the universe delivered a twist. A meeting, a recognition, an opportunity, that turned a single act into the beginning of a whole new chapter. The woman who had walked into his interview wasn't just a survivor, she was a reminder of what courage could do, how small choices in moments of crisis could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. And for Michael, that day became more than an interview, more than a job application. It became a story he would carry forever, a story of fire, fear, chance, and the strange, miraculous intersections of life that make every risk worth taking. By the time he reached home that evening, exhausted but exhilarated, he understood something profound. Life doesn't always reward preparation, or careful planning, or polished resumes. Sometimes, it rewards instinct, empathy, and the courage to act when everything else tells you to hesitate. And sometimes, it rewards you with the most unexpected twist, the very person whose life you saved stepping into your world in a way that could change everything. Michael smiled, sinking into his chair, realizing that this day, so terrifying in its chaos, so exhausting in its intensity, had become one of the most defining days of his life. The fire had tested him, yes, but it had also connected him, revealed him, and shown him that the universe has a way of noticing bravery, even when you think no one is watching. And as he finally allowed himself to exhale, he knew that whatever came next, this job, this life, this new connection, was going to be extraordinary. Because sometimes, the heroism you don't even think about can lead to the most extraordinary encounters, and sometimes, fate is waiting quietly just around the corner, ready to show you that courage never goes unnoticed.